Samira Mohammed, the Managing Director of Dubai Quality Group, will launch the webinar. Ms. Samira.
Yes, thank you, Dua. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, distinguished speakers. Welcome to our webinar today, Mastering Ethical Businesses in Today's World, Navigating ESG Compliance. We will be starting the webinar by giving you a very small brief about Dubai Quality Group. Then I'll hand over to the distinguished speakers to talk about the climate change and ESG practices, to talk about the best practices in terms of ESG, the non-compliant risk, and then we will be sharing EN group journey towards sustainability. So I'll just start with a brief company profile. Basically, what is Dubai Quality Group, and who are we as a group? We've established since 1994 under the guidance of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President and the Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai. And our mission and vision was basically to spread the quality and the excellence culture within the Emirate of Dubai and within the UAE in general. Currently, we are operator under the umbrella of His Highness Sheikh Ahmed bin Saeed Al Maktoum. And we have successfully run since 1994. We have played a critical role in spreading quality and excellence within the United Arab Emirates, whether it has been in Dubai, whether it has been in Abu Dhabi, whether it has been in Ras Al Khaimah and anywhere in the UAE. We've been an instrumental in activating or in setting up all the excellence program, has it been government or private. Basically, now we are in line with the government, with the UAE and the Dubai government vision of the digital transformation, the artificial intelligence, and the journey towards being number one in all what we do. As a Dubai Quality Group, we are having different services. We're having our consultancy arm, we are having our training arm, and we are having our benchmarking arms. We are also having our awards. We currently run 7 awards in our portfolio. I don't want to take really long time explaining about the group. You can visit us at www.dqg.org to see and explore about our services and about our awards. Now I would like to hand over to Ms. Sumbul Zehra to actually start the webinar. Thank you. Ms. Sumbul.
Thank you, Samira. Yes, thank you, Samira, for handing it over to me, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Just give me a bit. I hope you all can see my screen. Yes. And can hear me properly. Perfect, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today, Mastering Ethical Business Practices and Navigating ESG Compliance. My name is Sumbul Zehra, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. On behalf of the Dubai Quality Group, ABAC Group, also known as Anti-Bribery, Anti-Corruption Center of Excellence, which is an ISO certification body, and Corporate Research and Investigations, also known as CRI Group, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking out the time and joining me and everyone else for this webinar today. So today's webinar's topic is of utmost relevance and significance. It will highlight the significance of conducting ethical business practices and its correlation with corporate governance and the environment. You must be thinking that how did we get to this fascinating topic? It is because the recent amendment to the standard ISO 37001, that is Anti-Bribery Management System certification, they have added the clause of climate change to this standard. And this is mainly due to the ever-growing interconnectedness between ethical business practices and environmental sustainability. We have an exciting agenda lined up and some distinguished speakers who will be sharing with us their invaluable insights. But we will get to that. We will delve deeper into that. But before, please let me allow me to cover some housekeeping items. First of all, the duration of the webinar, it will be 1 hour approximately. There will be a Q&A session after the presentations. You're most welcome to, ask the presenters about their topics, and also you can submit your questions in the chat. And if you face any technical difficulties, please feel free to mention in the chat and our support team will assist you. Now, please allow me to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Jaap Bastiaansen. He is the Chief Executive Officer and Senior Partner at Nexus Climate. He will be initiating the webinar. He's our keynote speaker, and he will be covering the first part, the basic knowledge about climate change, ESG practices, what are the preventive measures that can be taken to combat the climate change issues, and what are the global ESG initiatives and regulations. So please allow me to welcome Mr. Jaap. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Sumbal, and thank you for the organizers for deep diving into this always an extended, very important topic about ESG, but as well environment and sustainability. So in today's sessions, we'll walk you through a little bit about the environment, social, and governance. By integrating the ESG principles, and businesses can mitigate risk, capitalize on opportunities, and ensure long value creation for all stakeholders. If we go to the next slide, I think it's really well known to everyone, and especially for those as well here dialing in from Dubai, is really kind of the impact of the environment. So let's dive into some of the current events that are shaping our understanding of climate change and its urgent implications for businesses around the world. As we see here, we recorded the hottest temperatures where birds falling out of the sky. We encourage the floods. We experienced the floods here in Dubai ourselves as well, which has like a massive impact on businesses, but as well on health risk when it comes to health-related illnesses, mental health, rising sea levels, for example, and extreme weather are forcing communities really to relocate and to leading to kind of climate refugees. Now you think about, okay, what has this to do with sustainability? So if you go to the next slide, the climate change is really kind of refers to a change in the climate attributing directly or indirectly to human activity, altering the composition of the global atmosphere. So highlighting the climate change, which is really accelerating due to human activities, are one of the main drivers of what we're experiencing today. The temperature rise, for example, is really alarming, and immediate action really needs to be taken into place to limit to the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And as we dive into that a little bit later, we'll see why that is so important. If we dive into kind of the dimensions of sustainability, we actually see 3 pillars. The environment, I think we all understand. We see the interlinked pillars of environment, social, and governance, where each pillar is very crucial, and altogether they form a comprehensive framework for sustainable and ethical business practices. For example, on the social side, we see dimensions focusing on relationship of its employees, customers, suppliers, but then as well on the government side, we pertain to internal system of practices, controls, certifications, procedures, a company adopts to governance itself as well. And as Shawki, Ahwash will discuss this more in more details in one of the later sessions. The interconnectivity emphasizes that these dimensions are not standalone. They are deeply interconnected. Companies invest, for example, in clean energy, not only reduce environmental impact, but also can create jobs and enhance social well-being. So why should we care about sustainability? Sustainability is no longer an option. It's a business imperative. So let's explore why integrating sustainability into our business strategy is actually crucial for success. So we see, for example, where outdated technologies or practices faces an increased risk of obsolete and financial loss. For example, fossil fuel investments are becoming stranded assets as the world shifts more into renewable energies and maybe electrical vehicles, for example. We see as well as where previously profitable assets suddenly might turn into a liability from a company perspective. So companies that fail to comply potentially can face fines, they can face legal actions, or they even get more pressure from the regulatory authorities. So you will face, as a business, you will face new risks. And as we go to the next slide, we kind of can categorize them a little bit in three kind of categories. So one is really kind of the natural disasters, as we saw on the opening slide, where suddenly there's an increased frequency of these severities of these disasters. But that actually brings very unexpected disruptions into our life. It's not only for a lot of businesses, it's really about the supply chains. And that really can increase like cost of operations. But from business point of view as well, it could act as a reputational damage, reputational risk. So the reputational risk is really by, if you ignore these sustainabilities, your consumers, investors, and other stakeholders are increasingly holding these companies accountable for their environmental and social impacts. If you go to the next slide, kind of like it summarizes some of these kind of risks again. So how some of the physical risks can actually translate into financial impacts. So as we already highlighted on the supply chain, but as well on how prices might increase when it comes to food prices that come to the region. We see as well increasing demand. Another transition risk is maybe policy and legal risk or technology risk that kind of could mitigate based on all these kind of client environments. Now, how do companies actually respond to these external risks? If you go to the next slides, it's actually that many companies, and we're going to see some of the examples shortly after I finish with the Etisalat, but as we see, like many companies are actually already leading the way by taking proactive actions in their ESG strategy. It could be from like simple training sessions as we do today, or so like increasing the awareness about what's happening into the environment. But companies can as well apply into sustainable innovations, deploy employee wellness program. And as we see here, some of them are very easy to implement with a very high impact. And some of them are a bit more complex, as we can hear throughout the presentations later today as well. And we dive a little bit deeper of that towards the end of the presentations. In today's interconnected world, global initiative and regulation play actually a very important role in shaping the ESG landscape. Understanding some of the frameworks that are out there, it's essential for business to align their strategies with international standards. So for example, as you see here, and what we highlighted on before is really kind of the Paris Climate Agreement as a landmark for international treaty adopted in 2015 already, where the goal is actually to limit the global warming to well below the 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial levels from where we are like hundreds of years ago. And as we see, like in today's world, is really kind of a challenge. I think we're already at the tipping points. I think June was recorded to be the hottest month ever, and it's only kind of increasing. So as you can see in the predictions on the left-hand corner of this slide, is really, you know, it's going to be a challenge to really stay below the 2 degrees, and actually the goal is 1.5 degree. If we don't take any action today, it's really going to increase by 3 to 5% over the coming years ahead. So the United Nations actually established a framework as well called the Sustainable Development Goals, as we see here. And I think a lot of you might already probably familiar with them, but adopted in 2015 actually consist of 17 goals addressing the global challenges such as poverty, inequality, climate change, degradation, all to be kind of justifiable by 2030. If you take like two very important ones in examples, actually SDG 13, climate action, is really kind of taking action in control and combat climate change and its impact around it. Another very important one is actually focusing on strengthening global partnerships and actually working together. This is not something you have to do in isolation as a company, maybe as yourself, but really finding a support network and partners to actually help you in achieving these sustainable development goals. If you go to the next slide, there are actually out there a lot of international frameworks establishing clear goals and standards to actually communicate these across the world. And as we see over the years, there's an increased awareness of implementing these standards. APAC is actually leading these initiatives very ahead. The Middle East is actually a very growing region where there's a lot of focus around these initiatives. Currently, only like around 2% of the public companies are actually implementing some of these, but there's a lot of focus and emphasis, especially within this region, to spearhead some of these initiatives over the coming years. By committing actually these international framework, countries and organizations can actually enhance their accountability. They are more likely to be trusted among stakeholders and the public when they publicly announce some of their disclosures and partnerships. If you go to the next slide, it actually talks a little bit about, okay, what is actually the UAE doing about this? And the UAE is actually proactively enhancing towards these sustainable development goals, as we see here in a status report in the right-hand corner, by aligning actually the national efforts within these 17 permitted goals. The UAE actually contributes significantly to the global sustainability goals and collaborating with international players to make that happen. The UAE actually set a lot of bold targets in renewable energy and water conservation. And actually they aim, for example, to generate 50% of their energy from renewables by 2050. Exemplified by the projects like Mohammed bin Rashid's Al Maktoum Solar Park, for example. By 2031, the UAE aims to be transitioned to a circular economy, emphasizing the resource efficiency, waste reduction, sustainable consumption patterns within the UAE. The UAE leads with initiative projects such as Masdar and Expo City, striving for zero carbon urban development and advanced desalination technologies to ensure water security in this very dry region. So as you can see, there's a lot of initiatives taking place within the UAE, and through its initiatives, the UAE is actually strengthening its global reputation and influence, promoting partnerships for climate actions and sustainable development worldwide. And I think with this, it actually concludes a little bit kind of like a brief introduction about the importance of sustainability. And I'll hand it over to my colleagues at Etisalat to actually hear about how they actually practically implemented some of these challenges and their sustainable efforts.
Thank you, Jaap, for that insightful presentation. Next, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, Mr. Felix and Mr. Andrew Dunnett from Etisalat EAND. We know, as many of you know, that Etisalat is one of the renowned telecommunications entity in the UAE. And therefore, I would like to introduce Mr. Felix as the Director of Compliance Assurance and Governance, and Mr. Andrew as the Senior Vice President Sustainability at Etisalat. We would like to hear from you about your recent accomplishment of ISO 37001 Anti-Bribery Management System certification and how it is aligned with and enhances your sustainability efforts. So I'm going to hand it over to Felix. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and and it's a pleasure to be here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Well, today in this first section of our presentation, we will try to look at how EN integrates ethics and compliance in the ESG factors to deliver stakeholder value. We would also look at our journey to ISO 37001 certification. Last and not the least, we would look at how EN justify its investment in sustainability initiatives and how it translates to our bottom line. Ethical leadership and culture is crucial to the ethics and compliance program and to our sustainability initiatives. At EN, we recognize and reward ethical behavior. We also encourage all employees and all leaders within EN to mirror ethical leadership and integrate our core values in their decision making. We promote a culture of probity, accountability, and good governance. We, as the ethics and compliance function, in collaboration with other assurance stakeholders within EN, we work closely to keep management honest vis-a-vis its sustainability commitments. Next slide, please. As the ethics and compliance function, it is our core mission to make good possible. And to achieve this, we've developed a robust ethics and compliance framework, which includes our code of ethical conduct and key policies that outlines EN's commitment to ethical behavior. All of this is integrated into our sustainability initiatives. When we look at the environment, EN as a telecom operator it's a core infrastructure for the UAE and for the communities that we operate in. An adverse weather condition could impact this asset and cause a significant impact in these communities. To this effect, we are developing green solutions, such as making a transition to EV, looking at our fleet management, remodeling our refuse collection and disposal processes, and doing other things within this vertical to ensure that we meet our sustainability requirements. It is also important to highlight that social activism coming from our customers, our employees, or the broader communities that we operate in can have a significant impact on our share value and our reputation. To this effect, we've developed a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program within EN. We are looking at labor practices. We've updated our code of conduct to demonstrate our stance on child labor and modern slavery. At EN, we have a speak up culture that we say, if you hear something, see something, you say something. We are customer obsessed, and we are working closely to review our compensation processes to ensure a fair remuneration practices within EN. Going to the governance element, which is core to what we do as ethics and compliance, we look at board's effectiveness and how it impacts the organization. We look at regulatory enforcement arising from the extraterritorial nature of the FCPA, the UAE Penal Code, and the Securities and Commodities guidelines on public joint stock companies. This is very important. So as to this, we've developed a robust ethics and compliance program, including an anti-bribery management system, which we obtained ISO certification with the ABAC Center of Excellence. We've also developed charters and policies to ensure compliance with the Securities and Commodities Authority guidelines for public joint stock companies to ensure effective governance. And this is a continual improvement process, and we're working with key stakeholders to improve our processes. Next step, please. Next slide, please. This is the crucial part, our journey to ISO 37001. We say compliance is a journey and not a destination. We conducted a gap assessment with the Center of Intelligence in 2021. We actually conducted equally pre-certification and stage 1 audit with the ICA, and with the ABAC Center of Excellence, we actually conducted the final assessment in November of 2023. The handover ceremony was in December of 2023, and we're proud to be one of the few companies in the region to have achieved ISO certification. This is a major achievement for a telecom operator, and we continuously work with the ABAC Center of Excellence to ensure that we maintain this certification and we continue to infuse ethics and compliance in all our operations within EAN and the way we operate. Now, it is sometimes very difficult to articulate the contribution or to the bottom line when we make investments in sustainability initiatives. This is very crucial as we have to demonstrate to our governing body and key stakeholders that sustainability really matters. So looking at our improved MCI rating, this would in turn ensure that we have a better credit rating, improve share value, and at the end of the day, it would also impact our borrowing cost. Etisalat has been voted as a great place to work because of the diversity and inclusion and all the people as employee-related elements that we've developed within our program. So this in itself equally translates to reduced costs in terms of retaining employees and hiring new employees within EAN. It translates directly to our bottom line. In terms of regulatory oversight, we've not had any fines or penalties because when something do go wrong, the amount of regulatory fines and penalty and the damage to our reputation would be significant. When you translate this to the bottom line, we can use this as our path to ESG materialization to demonstrate how ESG initiatives and sustainability initiatives contribute to the bottom line. Last but not the least, EAN has been voted as the fastest technology brand in MEA and the most valuable brand portfolio in the MEA region. This in itself can be used to demonstrate the materialization to our sustainability initiative within EAN. As a collective, working in tandem with all the other assurance providers within EAN, we make sure that we keep management honest vis-a-vis these commitments, and we make sure that we keep driving the sustainability agenda. So I'll pass it over to Andrew to give an overview of how we are working on within the sustainability space. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you may be in the world at present. Look, this afternoon or this morning is about quality, excellence, compliance. I think Jaap gave a really good overview in terms of both regulation, but also the business case and where things are, wherever you may be working on these issues. I think Felix gave a really good zoom in to ISO 37001 and looking at the excellent work colleagues have done on that. I think from my perspective as a SVP for sustainability, so responsible for the sustainability program across EAN, which operates from Afghanistan to Morocco and up into Europe as well now. I think there's probably two things I just want to say to those reflective practitioners who are on the call. 2 points I'd like to make. The first is around the increasing number of regulatory frameworks, legal frameworks, investor expectations that we are seeing. And Jaap put up the slide with CSRD coming in Europe, and we have a company in our group who's listed on the French stock exchange. We have investments in Europe. So that's becoming increasingly significant to us in the way we're thinking, IFRS and the regulatory frameworks that are coming around that. So I think that the number one thing that I am worried about probably the most in this area is the quality of our data. So in response to these increasing regulatory, investor, legal frameworks, we need to be confident that the non-financial data that we are reporting on, whether that's diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's our environmental footprint, our non-financial data has got to have the same quality and assurance and validity as our financial data. And therefore, that really involves a number of things. Firstly, the platform that we build or that enables us to report effectively and efficiently has got to be as good as the platform which is used by the group for the financial reporting. In fact, there's a very strong argument of integrating your non-financial reporting into the financial reporting systems, because those who manage the financial reporting of the company, they've been doing that from the Medici onwards. The accountants, they understand how to report effectively. And if we're going to be measured by the investor community, as we increasingly are, on the quality of our non-financial data, then we have to be confident that the digital reporting platform that we have in place integrates smoothly with the financial reporting system, and that the governance and controls that are in place to make sure that our financial numbers are correct, we also want to utilize that governance framework to make sure that our non-financial reporting is correct. So if you put that into reality, what does that mean? Well, we have about 700 to 1,000 data points, basic data points that go into our annual report. And there are many sub-data points behind those. And so building a system that enables our non-financial data from all the companies in the group to be integrated into one reporting platform that is confident that that data is of the same quality the financial data is a difficult and challenging space. But if this webinar is about quality, is about excellence, is about compliance, then at the end of the day, our sustainability program stands on the quality of that data. So give a very simple, example of that. We're currently developing our climate transition plan. So we announced our net zero targets, both at COP27 and COP28 for the whole group. And we're now going into the hard yards of business planning associated with each of those targets. Also looking at circularity, biodiversity, water, key elements that we need to address. And then also, again mentioned by Jaap, is the financial risks to the business of how we manage our response to the climate crisis. So what is the potential financial risks associated with the company, and of course many of our companies being in the front line of climate change. So bringing those numbers into a reporting system that is credible in the face of increasing regulation, increasing legal frameworks, and increasing awareness and interest from the investor community, so that, as Felix said, the likes of MSCI, CDP, Sustainalytics, and all the ESG ratings can understand our journey and believe that the data that we put in front of them is credible. So I think that's one thing in a webinar on compliance, excellence, quality is the data for me. The second thing, reflecting on the webinar, comes to governance and building a governance framework which enables that data to be forthcoming, but enables what we say publicly to be being delivered through the company. So I think Felix gave a very good example in terms of how we were working in compliance across the piece in that first slide that he put up. I think when you look at it from a slightly different angle, which is a sustainability angle, then we have a subcommittee of the board with responsibility for our sustainability program. They sign off through resolution the work that we're doing. We've then established a sustainability committee of predominantly the management team, so 6 members of the executive committee, the management team of the global company are on the sustainability committee. They meet quarterly and they resolve the work from all areas of the ESG spectrum that we're working on. and give us support and give us leverage in the business to go and do some of the complex work that we're doing. And then we have two subcommittees, one on social and governance chaired by the Chief Legal Officer, and one on the environment chaired by the Chief Technology Officer. So I think putting in place, you're not going to have quality, excellence, compliance if you don't have a governance system, which has the key stakeholders in the business driving that agenda forward. And then I think the final point I'd make, which is directly related to the governance, is all of this work is done in collaboration. The sustainability agenda is not an agenda of my team; it's an agenda of the whole company, and therefore audit and risk are a critical partner in what we do, in measuring what we do internally, and providing us with support in continuing to focus the company on these critical issues. And then I think the second thing which we will be doing for the first time as a company this year is external assurance. So looking at the reporting that we do, considering what are the most material areas that in amongst those 700 plus main data points. But you can't mark your own homework. You have to have external assurance if you're going to, coming back to the first point, have credibility in the data and credibility in what you're saying you're doing. Then you've got to invite external assurers. And if you're inviting external assurers in, then you've got to be absolutely sure that the people who are collecting the data know the framework in which they're operating, know the policy that they're collecting the data to, and have been trained to do so. So, look, I mean, we could go on all day, but I think that the two main points I want to leave you with is number one is the data, and that increasingly and already we're being measured on the quality of our data, and to focus on excellence and compliance, we need to focus on data. And secondly, to focus on that compliance, we need a governance framework that is robust, that is fit for purpose, and that enables the sustainability agenda that we're all working on to be driven throughout the company effectively and efficiently. So I'll stop there and hand back to Sunil.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andrew and Felix, for that insightful and valuable presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our third speaker, Mr. Shawki Ahwash, who is an AML, CFT, and sanctions expert. He's got a wealth of experience in addressing how unethical business practices impact our environment as a whole, and he'll be talking about the negative repercussions on unethical business practices and on the environmental sustainability. So I'm going to hand it over to him right now. And yeah, you can take it ahead from here.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. So again, hello, good afternoon, good morning, Assalamu alaikum. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the cordial invite. I guess so far, the three gentlemen and colleagues have really paved the way for us to delve into the risks and vulnerabilities that we may get exposed to as doing business in this unprecedented, digitized, interconnected economy where many things overlap. And to set the scene, let me say that governance, risk, and compliance can no longer operate in silos. So that's why we are seeing these three main pillars of the new organization getting merged into at one time as GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And on the other side, we are seeing an uptick in ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. So we need to build synergies across these dimensions in order to run the business in an ethical way and to avoid any downside of non-compliance. Next slide, please. First and foremost, I mean, it's good to have procedures, to have the laws, to abide by the laws, but creating an inner motive, which is the culture that should be fostered across organization is to have an ethical workforce joining any organization, whether it's a financial institution, whether it's a service company. So we need to look for integrity and ethics among our capital human talents as a basic start or as a baseline to run ethical and a governance-oriented business. Second slide, please. Now let me try to walk you through the education or the learning curve that organization needs to acquire to stay abreast of the new regulation, which, as mentioned earlier by Felix, I guess he alluded to the extraterritoriality. He alluded to couple of regulation that may implicate the business when doing a contract or procuring business overseas, because these laws go beyond the boundaries of the issuing state or the issuing agency in a certain country. Couple of examples are the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act of the United States, the UK Bribery Act, and on top of that is the Office of Foreign Asset Control Regulation, which may implicate US persons as well as non-US persons. And here we should focus and heed the risk of extraterritoriality. So to start with, we need to understand that there are international conventions binding anti-bribery and corruption. It's not coming from vacuum. There is a United Nations convention called UNCAC, which is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, requesting countries joining this agreement to report and to exchange information on corrupt practices. So this is a network and mechanism that is working to help the world uproot corruption and bribery. Second, the UNODC, which is a basic arm of the United Nations based in Vienna, it talks about stolen asset recovery. So embezzled assets can be recalled at one point in time when there is robust financial intelligence unit working. When you have corrupt practices, jurisdiction can repatriate these assets back to taxpayers who have the right to enjoy this money for services, whether it's in education, in health, in good roads, in good transportation means. Also, lately, there was a sanction regime rolled out by the US Treasury called the Magnitsky Act, specifically targeting corrupt politicians and the human rights abusers. So for organizations, for banks, onboarding customers, they need to know that their customers or even their customer, or sometimes known as the supply chain, that these guys are not involved in corrupt practices, because having these on board or having accounts for these guys will really bring risks to the organization. So we talked about the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act and the UK Bribery Act. Also, understanding the FATF recommendation, how to abide by these recommendations, especially on the part of financial institutions, non-bank FIs, and what we call DNFDPs, or designated non-financial businesses and professions, like lawyers, like accountants. And in the previous presentation, we talked about external assurance. This external assurance usually comes from external auditors or external professions who have the obligation to be in compliance with the rules and regulation. Next slide, please. No, you have to keep clicking, I guess, to switch to the slide that comes next. Yeah. Also, another challenge for us is the ever-evolving nature of predicate offenses known as the original crimes, because there is always an original crime happening before, let's say, money laundering, like fraud, like environmental crime. And we have seen many sanctions targeting people as well as legal entities for violating or harming the environment, from the oceans to the forest to what we call sometimes as lodging, like cutting trees in a very harmful way to the environment by killing some kind of breeds and animals, for example, to sell the elephant tusk for or to finance criminal activity. So all of these predicate offenses should come or be incorporated in the enterprise-wide risk management framework for organization to be behaving and acting as a good social citizen, or within the corporate social responsibility framework. Next slide, please. Here we're having a real example of a sanction targeting human right abuse and distant water fishing for some Chinese companies who were trying to go on fishing fleets and killing or being involved in random killing of fish and threatening ocean fish life and and everything, the ecosystem beneath the water. So this is a real example. So imagine that a company is extending service or a bank is onboarding this entity. It means there was no enough due diligence made on these clients before accepting them to have an account or to render a service for these guys. Next slide, please. So let me just wrap up why the sanctions were imposed on specifically this Chinese company. There was a human right abuse of the crew members. There was kind of slavery or forced labor or coercion. The working condition was so bad. It could be due to human trafficking and smuggling. And in addition to this, or on top of that, is the environmental and socio-economic effect of climate change. So when you harm the environment, future generation will be paying the price for, as mentioned earlier by Jaap, in rising temperature, rising sea level. So we're seeing that I come from a banking background, from a compliance background, and we're talking the same language like my three colleagues. So everything is being blended to have a more robust GRC ESG systems. Next slide, please. Also, regulatory agencies and United Nations agencies are zooming in on these issues. For example, there was a wonderful paper or research done by United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime talking about corruption through waste management, called cash in the trash, because many countries, unfortunately, sometimes try to get rid of their waste or the garbage collection, and they dump them in the sea, in the ocean, or in landfills that do not comply with safety standards. And here we talk about a lot of corruption and criminal network colluding together to gain contracts from the government, and there is always bribery and corruption coming in for these big deals or hot deals to happen. So this is also a major part in today's governance, risk, and compliance framework. And also the FinCEN, which is the US Financial Intelligence Unit, Financial Crime Enforcement Network, plays a leading role in raising awareness and issuing guidelines on kleptocracy, or how to detect corrupt practices when you have public contracts, and especially when you have politically exposed people you are dealing with as an institution, as a business, as an NGO, you name it. Next slide, please. Also here we are seeing another example on sanction targeting a politically exposed person because of the irresponsible extraction of natural resources, that instead of getting the revenue of these resources for the people, for the taxpayer, are done for the enrichment of the political elite. And this is what we call in the area of compliance as illicit enrichment. So preventing the taxpayer from enjoying a decent life, these resources are being exploited in the benefit of the elite. And this is how many sovereign or autonomous sanctions are fighting this phenomena by imposing sanction on these officials. Definitely, organizations need to know how they build a transaction or enter into a contract with these guys, because again, they will be attracting risk to their business. Next slide, please. Another thing that we need to do is to know the other side of the transaction, like know your customer and know your vendor, because sometimes we're dealing with a guy or an entity which is in itself violating the sanctions. So it's not only to know my customer, but I need to understand and practice and exercise due diligence and even enhance due diligence on my suppliers to know they are not procuring goods, let's say, from sanctioned countries, from sanctioned companies. They are not dealing with dual-use goods or goods that can be used for civil and military purposes at the same time. Next slide, please. And another risk here is when dealing with legal entities, we need to know who owns this entity, who really controls this entity, because many times criminals or sanctioned targets try to hide in shell companies, in complex ownership structures, which require a very delicate and serious due diligence when you try to analyze the ownership structure. And when we talk about who owns or controls, we need to understand fully as an organization who has control over entity X and who owns entity X. And this is not a very simple homework. Sometimes you need a lot of expertise. You need a specialized software to know with whom you are dealing. Because if an entity is controlled or owned by someone on the blacklist, then the entity will become ipso facto sanctioned. So you screen entity X, it will be clear on the sanction list. However, when it's run by a designated individual, you need to treat the entity as designated as well. So knowing the ultimate beneficial owner is a very difficult job sometimes, but it needs to be done on the part of organization. Next slide, please. Yes, just one last remark on this slide is that what adds to the complexity of identifying at the end of the day is the difference in regulation. The US law is different from the EU law. For example, the EU law looks more on the control prong more than the US law does. And even the ownership threshold are different under the US and the EU. Next slide, please. And to have the best governance structure is to have the tone set at the top by the board of directors, to have a first line of defense, which is the business people aware of the compliance regulation, to have certified people within the compliance or the second line of defense, and a very, let's say, well-developed internal audit function, which is independent but not isolated from the business. So when we say independence, we don't mean isolation. And a whistleblowing program is always an asset to have, because it would be another measure of the speak up culture that Felix also has alluded to. I don't know if we are done with my slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a couple of key takeaways is to say that every organization needs to have its own anti-bribery and corruption policy. There is no one size fits all, no silver bullet solution. This comes according to the complexity and geographic footprint of the organization. Also, when we talk about sanction, we need to always remember they are strict liability, regardless of your intent. If you violate the sanction, you are liable. And correspondent banks, mainly in the European Union and the United States, are becoming so keen on knowing how their counterpart fight anti-bribery and corruption. So they go very deeply in their visit or in their one-on-one compliance interview, trying to know how their counterparts build their policies, what is reported, what's not reported, and everything about bribery and corruption risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shawki. That was wonderful. And you summarized everything very nicely. And it was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Jaap, again. He's gonna come in and take everything, what all the speakers just mentioned, and he's gonna convert everything into implementation strategies, because, you know, concepts are not everything. You need to take these concepts and implement it into your corporation strategy. So I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Jaap. He's going to address some practical guidelines for every organization and industry to implement ESG compliance. So Jaap, you can take it over from here.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. I know we are running a bit short on time, so we go to it quickly. But if everyone has any questions as well throughout the presentation, maybe they can put them already in the Q&A box so we can address them in the next 5 minutes. But I think we touched base already on the implementation strategy relative to the easiness of implementation and the overall impact, where some of the speakers already kind of touched base on the compliance or regulatory framework, what they're doing around emission reductions, as we saw with the CRI Group, but as well how they engage with the employment and the community engagement. So one element that really stood out was what Andrew mentioned, is around the data challenge, right? It's really about integrating the data, not only from a compliance and risk perspective, but actually integrating the resources when it comes to integrating the data, when it comes to financial and compliance and environmental data in one single framework. Now, a lot of companies can do this and think about, okay, let's do this in Excel, let's do this in-house, but there's like over 1,000 data points available. So one element and something to think about is using sustainable innovation. So there's actually a lot of like companies and startups that start developing some expertise in these type of areas. So you can think about, okay, is this something we're going to build in-house, which will take time, or are we going to take something off the shelf that's ready available? So the implementation around sustainability is as well the governance about encouraging company to foster a culture of innovation, to find new solutions and challenges, and work with potentially startups to bring these new solutions in-house. If you go to the next slide, we talked already about the compliance and risk framework to kind of implement and showcase to the outside world by achieving ISO certifications, attend compliance training, but as well think about and regular update in-house about practices and new regulations. If you go to the next slide, and that's something I think that's inland for all of us, is like on this call, is really kind of, okay, in the eyes of the compliance team. I think as we saw, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes time it's a long journey to align internal stakeholders. I think as Felix mentioned as well, sometimes it's about the bottom line and to showcase that sustainable solutions as well can create alpha in that sense to improve return on investment. Maybe not in the short term, but definitely on the longer term, by mitigating some of the risks, by making sure that ESG compliance actually should align with the overall business strategy and values, and ensuring sustainability efforts contribute to the long-term success of the environment. And as we see here, we walk through it maybe very quickly, is really kind of like a 5-step approach on how you kind of go about it. Okay, first is assess the current assessment. Where are we today? And how do we go from A to B? That's kind of like basically what this diagram actually says. By drafting an ESG plan, by setting realistic and measurable objectives, aligning by the overall mission and values of the organization. It's not by just ticking a box, but really kind of trying to find a way to integrate into the overall organization. And then I think, as Andrew mentioned, it's really about like data-driven. So use data to kind of prove out some of these measures, measure and respond to it. So trying to stay agile around that in those kind of environments. If we go to the next slide as well. And it's probably like what we all touch based on and what kind of come out of the presentation is really kind of the triple lens around the ESG compliance. It's the regulatory side on one end, the different industry. Why does it matter? Because like there are industry specific guidelines and benchmark that are maybe very unique to the industry that you work in. Then there's always an ongoing change about the regulatory framework. I think as Felix, Andrew, and Shawki actually mentioned, is that there are constant changes in this framework, and making sure that you're aware of that around that. Maybe last but not least is really kind of the overarching dual intersection of some of these ESG goals by using technology and using data, which helps in really enabling organizations to streamline and know where you are and where you go from A to B. Today, there's a lot of innovative solutions, either is it AI, AOT, the blockchain, and things like that, to actually develop and track some of these sustainable solutions, either in-house or via third-party kind of environments. And if you go to the last slide, maybe before we hand it over to the Q&A, is really by increasing and recognizing that sustainability is crucial for business success, as outlined by the McKinsey framework here, for example. Executive actually must lead an establishment, a structure that treats sustainability as a material business rather than just a matter for investment relationships or tick box exercise, as we already established. But then as well, the companies actually should organize a sustainable efforts around specific topics that are material to their unique business values and propositions, rather than have a one-size-fits-all approach in that sense. This modular design allows for agility, which is important to kind of change to the always changing environment, either from a regulatory point of view or sustainability point of view. But then as well, empower decision-making processes on the right level. So centralized sustainability teams should have actually more decision-making authorities to drive change and set corporate-wide sustainable agendas rather than having to rely on third-party organizations. And as we see here, education is always on the forefront of these kind of initiatives to bring awareness to everyone in kind of this ecosystem. And then hopefully over time, supply chains will continue to evolve into kind of circular economies that things are kind of more sustainable and agile across the way. I know we went through it relatively fast. There must be probably questions as well along the way. I know we want to wrap it up as well in the next 5 minutes, so to give everyone has to go to the next meeting. So I hand it over back to Sumbal, and thanks again for putting this session together.
Thank you so much, Jaap, and everybody for their valuable insights. Now we have some time to go ahead for the Q&A session, and we already have 2 questions that our audience have asked already. So, and we encourage more people, if they have any questions related to the presentation presented by the speakers or the related topics, please feel free to be interactive and engaging and ask these questions personally or in the Q&A box. So we already have one question over here. The floor is open. Any speaker can take up this question. So the first question is from Mr. Balakrishnan. He's asking that many not ethical business people and the culture, I mean, it's not framed properly, but I think he's asking that the company culture, usually the company cultures are corrupt and they accept these, these unethical practices that usually, affect our environment and climate change. So how to reason out these toxic people in the management, or, are there any suggestions from you, from the speakers over here? You can pick up this answer and talk about it.
If you allow me, sorry, Felix, go ahead.
All right. Just the first most important thing, we say culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it is important that we have the right tone from the top, from the governance body, which is our board of directors and leadership. I'll take a case in question, Ian. Ethics and compliance reports functionally to the board. So which means that we can bypass certain activities within the organization to report directly to the audit committee if we see something that is going wrong. Equally, the board has oversight over all our sustainability initiatives, as well as the ethics and compliance initiatives. We have a management committee called the Ethics and Compliance Steering Committee, which oversees all ethics and compliance matters. So if we have a situation of ethical or unethical individuals within the organization, it will be escalated and they'll be taken out. We have a comprehensive investigation process as well that we can go through to make sure that this is corrected. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Balakrishnan, if you're here, you can probably take it ahead and ask questions directly. I think it's reasons, what you've said, Felix. Mr. Shawki, yes, please go ahead if you want to.
Yeah, I would like just to add a couple of things from the intelligence point of view, like how to know or detect that a certain organization has a toxic or a culture that may be implicating or posing some kind of threats to the environment, to the society. Here, adverse media screening is very important to have certain tools within the compliance framework that may look for adverse media, because sometimes you may have a social media, a blog, or a newspaper or a TV station talking about, let's say, the owner or the major shareholder of this organization, or even the organization itself, that it has been involved in this and this and this. Another thing is that to know if you are doing business with a certain entity, to fully analyze its ownership structure and know at the end of the day who is the controlling and who is the owner, and try to screen these guys in a very robust way to know if they have been implicated or designated, whether in the near past or from some time ago. So these will let you know with whom you are dealing.
Perfect. We have another question. Let's just take it one step at a time because we have a couple of questions lined up. I think this second question is, are logistic companies, especially into maritime, visiting EU, be impacted by CSRD compliance from 1st January 2025? I think this is directed towards you, Mr. Shawki, and Mr. Jaap. Can you take it ahead?
Yeah, I can answer this one.
Perfect.
So the CSRD actually aims to enhance and standardize the reporting framework across the EU. So it does impact various sectors, including the logistic and maritime transport. So the answer is yes, logistic companies, including those specializing in maritime logistic and visiting the EU will be impacted.
And that is from 1st January 2025, starting next year. Right, yeah. Perfect. We have another question. Please take it ahead if you feel that's something you want to talk about. The question is, what role does governance audit play and organizational politics? Most of the leaders are commercially driven, and the root reason for all corruptions are unrealistic targets. How does Ethics Committee ensure this, where such committees are ornamental? Who wants to take it ahead? Do you want me to repeat the question again?
No, that's fine to me. I just have like a quick feedback on this, is that organization need to align their compliance strategy with their business strategy to strike the right balance, because you cannot attract business that will bring risk. I mean, risk is becoming too costly on organization. Penalties, sometimes license is being revoked by regulators. So it's no more a walk in the park to violate rules and regulation. So here comes the balance that we should strike between getting a business that is compliant and don't be too aggressive or have a risk appetite that may imperil the organization or bring it to a stop.
Right. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Sheikh Mohsin Ali. If you have any further questions, feel free to answer again, ask the question again. Now we have another question from Mr. Azhar Khan. He's asking which frame to be followed for sustainability reporting and why?
I had some issues with
no
Zoom. Yeah, there's like, it depends a little bit on like the industry and things like that. So it's really hard to answer, but I think there are like standard frameworks, I think, as we outlined in the presentations, that some companies, they report they're using a GIR method, or some of them are following the SASB, kind of the sustainability accounting standards. But there are some companies that actually report on 2 or 3 of these requirements. But I think, as already kind of alluded to, kind of some of the CSRD compliance actually coming effect in January 25. So often there's like special softwares that are actually doing this for you, or accountants that actually translate some of these requirements into the regional or local requirements by default. Some of them are like, more on a voluntary basis. So, they're not kind of enforced by the regulator. But over time, I think what we will see is that there's more and more regulatory requirement about ESG and sustainable reporting coming our way.
Okay. Thank you, Jaap. There's another question from Mr. Balakrishnan. He's asking that, are there any ethics institute where we can equip ourselves with certified ethics officer or something like that? I mean, are there any certifications that professionals can take where they are taught about ethical practices and sustainability? Are there any courses like that?
I don't want to delve into marketing for other institutes here, but usually what maybe the audience is more into conducting business in an ethical way or business ethics, I would say that there are many esteemed institutions which roll out courses revolving around corporate governance. And when you talk governance, definitely there should be a big part or an integral part for ethics. So maybe there is no a standalone ethical course, but definitely everything within the realm of corporate governance will definitely cover business ethics, like what are the customer rights, the customer duties, transparency, reporting, disclosure. All of these kind of ethical ways would be, I would say, would be under a general corporate governance course.
Muted. I'm going to take one last question, and then I'm going to close this session. The last question is that what factors contribute to the oil and gas construction, these high-risk companies, the bribery-prone companies, and what measures can be undertaken to mitigate risk in this industry, in the oil and gas industry? Are there any suggestions?
I don't know if the colleagues have any intervention to make, but from an AML sanction background, the oil and gas is an industry under spotlight. So
Right.
if you just look at the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, you would see how the G7, along with the US, have rolled out what we call the price cap. So you can still buy Russian oil, but not beyond a certain threshold. So it's a complex industry that you need to deal with in a very vigilant way. Now, when you need to mitigate anti-bribery and corruption risk within this industry, I guess you have to be aware of the extraterritoriality impact of major laws, like we mentioned, the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, the UK Bribery Act, and to see when you are dealing with a contractor or someone in the excavation business, what kind of measures they have, like due diligence on the vendor. Do they have anti-bribery and corruption policies? Do they have reporting policies to know that at least your client is aware of these risks as a first line of defense? But definitely the oil and gas is such an industry that is now wrapped with a lot of sanction, a lot of restrictive measures from major regulators around the world. This is in a nutshell.
All right.
Because we can
Perfect.
talk for hours on this.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to just, Felix, you want to
So
say something?
So if I may add, you would have to look at the implementation of a strong anti-bribery and anti-corruption policy and a program as a whole. Now you have to look at leadership commitment in terms of the oil and gas industry, because leadership commitment is key to any anti-bribery and anti-corruption program, and setting the right tone from the top, be it the board. We look at risk assessment. Risk assessment would go beyond regular risk assessment because you're working in a complex industry and in complex jurisdictions. So you look at a risk assessment, including a robust due diligence process, third-party due diligence process, where you perform as basic due diligence for those who are operating in low-risk areas, standard due diligence for those that you think are not of medium risk, and enhanced due diligence where you engage third-party providers to conduct in-depth analysis and investigation on some of these companies. Training and awareness is key, is crucial. Compliance policies may just be ticking the box, but when you create a proper awareness across the organization, this in turn would enhance your compliance program and reduce bribery and corruption, including speak-up culture. We're looking at continuous monitoring and control of the ethics and compliance program and your activities in all the markets that you operate in, and make sure that you have an escalation mechanism where things are escalated to the head office and dealt with within a reasonable time. I'll go back again to the speak up culture, because sometimes operating as a holding company, you may not be in the markets, or some of the oil and gas assets may be in very remote areas. So the speak up culture has to be very strong. It has to be enhanced across all the organization, to ensure that things are escalated in good time. You equally have to build a comprehensive regulatory and legal and regulatory framework where you can monitor changes in regulation in real time across all the markets that you operate in. To emphasize ethics, culture, and integrity, like I said earlier on, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So an ethical culture should percolate across the organization, touching every activity that you deal with. And last but not least, is an incident response and reporting framework, where you make sure that if something happens, it's escalated to the right individuals within the organizations to be dealt with in a quick and easy way. I think that in a nutshell, that would enable you to have a comprehensive program that would respond to such concerns when they do come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Now, I would like to wrap up the webinar. I would like to thank our panelists, first of all, Mr. Felix, Mr. Andrew, Mr. Shawki, and our keynote speaker, Mr. Jaap, for gracing us with their presence and for sharing their valuable insights. I would like to thank our audience for making this webinar so engaging and interesting. You know, towards the end, it got really, really interesting when people started asking questions. And today, I just want to wrap up what we learned today, what we discussed today. So this webinar was about integrating ethical business practices into our sustainability efforts. And we talked about, all our speakers touched base on the real-time climate change occurrences that are happening today. We talked about how this is linked with unethical business practices and what are the negative repercussions. Mr. Felix and Mr. Andrew talked about their sustainability efforts, EAN's sustainability efforts, because they've been at the forefront of their ESG initiatives. We talked about due diligence practices and external assurance that is required to put in a sustainability framework in place for the corporations. And in the end, we talked about the whistleblowing culture. Felix highlighted that there is a high importance of ensuring there is a speak-up culture in the corporation, so that people, the colleagues, the employees, are entitled to talk about any unlawful or illegal incident that occurs in the company, so that the issues can be resolved. That was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar. We appreciate everyone, the panelists, the audience. We look forward. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us. You can have our email ID. We'll share it with you. You can share your details with us, and we can answer those questions as we can. And we look forward to seeing you again in our future events. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.